Hello, and welcome to Yesterday, Today, and Forever, a virtual ministry of the Churches of Christ. It is our desire to present to the 21st century person the faith of the first century Christians. We seek unity through the acceptance of the faith that was once and for all time delivered unto the saints, a system of faith which first began to be spoken by our Lord prior to his crucifixion, and was later confirmed to the saints by the apostles and inspired writers of the New Testament. Thus a faith from yesterday to today and into forever. Our speaker is Brian Barrett, who preaches for the church at Bear Branch, in Spurlockville, West Virginia. We encourage all persons interested in the faith of our fathers to open their Bibles, as we search the Scriptures, for these eternal truths, which can lead Christians back into unity as the family of God. Now, here is Brian.
We're studying this morning in the book of John, chapter 18, and we're going to pick up at verse 28. We can go back and pick up at verse 28. In looking at the arrest and trial of Jesus, as we're told that they led Jesus from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment, and it was early, and they themselves went not in the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, and that they might eat the Passover. Pilate then went out unto them and said, What accusation bring ye against this man? They answered and said unto him, If he were not a malefactor, we would not have delivered him unto thee. Then said Pilate unto them, Take ye him, and judge him according to your law. The Jews therefore said unto him, It is not lawful for us to put any man to death, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spake, signifying the death he should die. Excuse me. Then Pilate entered into the judgment hall again, and called Jesus, and said unto him, Art thou the King of the Jews? Jesus answered him, Sayest thou this thing of thyself, or did others tell it thee of me? Pilate answered, Am I a Jew? Thine own nation and the chief priests hath delivered thee unto me. What hast thou done? Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight that I should not be delivered unto the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence. Pilate therefore said unto him, Art thou a king then? Jesus answered, Thou sayest that I am a king. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. Every one that is of the truth heareth my voice. Pilate said unto him, What is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again unto the Jews, and said unto them, I find in him no fault at all. But ye have a custom that I should release unto you one at the Passover. Will ye therefore that I release unto you the King of the Jews? Then cried they all again, saying, Not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. We'll stop there. As we look at the verses this morning, John is accounting the transfer of Jesus from the Jews. Now, the Jewish leaders had arrested him late in the evening, and they had had him most of the night, and we're coming in toward the day, and as the morning was coming, they transferred him to the Jews, and so they led him from Caiaphas to Pilate, and again, when he was there, when he was led to him there, we see that the Jews wouldn't enter into Pilate's judgment hall because that was Gentile property, and by Jewish custom they would have been defiled, and having been defiled, they might not be able to eat the Passover, implying again that the Passover was not yet. It was still future tense in these particular verses. So Pilate went out, verse 29, to them and asked what accusation you bring against him. And they answered him and said, if he were not a malefactor, we would not have delivered him up unto thee. And again, malefactor just means an evildoer. If he wasn't an evil person or someone who did evil things, we would not have troubled you with this. We wouldn't be here at this time. Now, it's interesting as we look at this because, they talk about the fact of him being someone who had done evil, and we don't really see a direct accusation from them per se. But as Pilate goes back in to talk with Jesus, we see that they had apparently told him that Jesus made himself to be a king, that he was professing in essence to be the king of the Jews, because Pilate asked him questions about what it is exactly he had done, but in regards to proclaiming himself or being proclaimed a king that was so terrible that the Jewish people had delivered him, that is Jesus, up to the Romans. Now, generally speaking, I imagine Pilate was somewhat confused because these Jewish leaders were bringing a Jew to the Romans, and it would seem like it would probably be the opposite most of the time, that the Jewish people were trying to keep their people from falling into the hands of the Romans. And so it was no doubt for Pilate a somewhat confusing thing, considering that the Jews seemed to always be plotting, and leading up to, of course, AD 70, they continued to plot about how they could get rid of the Romans. And one of their big things that they were looking for was the fact that the Messiah would come and he would set up his kingdom and he would reign over the world. And of course, the Gentiles or whoever was there would be thrust out of the land and they would be by themselves. So there's a great deal of controversy in the sense of them bringing a Jew to Pilate rather than trying to hide him or to protect him from the Romans, especially if he is, you have to think that they were looking forward to the king that was supposed to come and deliver the nation from the Romans. And if they really believe that that is who Jesus was, then they wouldn't be delivering him up to the Romans, but they would be trying to plot and conspire with him to get rid of the Romans. And so this whole trial of Jesus, as it happened, arrested late in the evening, again tossed around all night long, delivered to Pilate finally in the early hours of the morning, and they bring accusations against him. And Pilate said to them, "Take ye him and judge him according to your law." If he's an evildoer, the Jews, generally the Romans didn't get involved in local affairs per se, unless it had to do with Rome. Now, if somebody attacked Rome, if someone was plotting against Rome, then the Romans would get involved with it. But if it was somebody out there who was just doing something, stealing, robbing, those general things, you have laws yourself, take him and try him. And so the Romans did not greatly get involved in these kind of things unless it escalated to some higher point to where they were threatening Roman citizens, or if a robber robbed a Roman citizen. Now that was a whole different thing because Roman citizens were protected by Rome, and so they would have gotten involved in that. But in Jewish matters, Pilate basically says, this is a matter among yourselves, and in that case, why again did you bring him to me? You have laws. You can try him yourself, take care of it. And we see the intensity here in the sense that they say it's not lawful for us to put any man to death. Yeah. It's okay, I guess, to conspire to put him to death, but their law won't allow, the law wouldn't allow them to be the ones who physically took his life in judgment. And so, we're as Jews and as a subdued people under the authority of Rome, they weren't allowed to use the death penalty. And so that's why they say, we brought him to you because you have authority in matters of the transgressions or the laws that have been broken. You can see that he pays the full price for his transgressions. And it kind of stops as far as their interaction with Pilate at this verse. But as Pilate goes in, we see some of the more deeper accusations that they made. Now, John doesn't go into a long conversation as to what the Jewish leaders, when they brought Jesus here and was talking to Pilate, made. But we can see those accusations, I guess, rather than John saying that the Jews said this and then Pilate going in and asking about that. John just kind of cuts out the part between the Jewish leaders and Pilate, and he uses the discussion between Pilate and Jesus as a way of showing what accusations that they made. And it had to do with the fact that, at least their accusation is that he was challenging the rule of Caesar and that Jesus was proclaiming himself to be king. And of course, the Romans had those who were in charge, and they set up the little governors and those and kings who ruled under the authority of Rome. But it seems that the accusation is that he has declared himself to be king of the Jews and is sort of planning some kind of uprising. And so, it's as good citizens of Rome, we just felt it was important, knowing this, to bring him to you. And so they make their principal accusation that Jesus is claiming to be the king of the Jews and causing strife and sedition and all kinds of those charges. And so Pilate goes back into the judgment hall again and called Jesus and said unto him, Art thou the King of the Jews? So even Jesus, in his response, we can see that, is this your question or is this something that someone else has told you? Jesus answered him, Sayest thou this thing of thyself, or did others tell it thee of me? Is this a question that you as a government official of Rome are asking? Are you concerned that of this, or have you just been told this? There's two things. Had Rome investigated, and if Rome had decided that he was some kind of troublemaker, then the charges would have came from Rome. if Pilate thought that there was any threat of rebellion, and the Jews had rebelled before and others had rebelled against Rome, and so had they heard something and investigated it and were bringing charges of themselves. And so really what Jesus is asking him, is this question because you, as a Roman official, are investigating me, or is it because somebody just told you this? And that makes a big difference. Again, if someone makes an accusation, they have to prove that generally in a court of law. And again, if Rome was investigating it and felt that there were any threats to Caesar or to Caesar's reign, then by all means they would have acted. And this is another one of those interesting junctures where we see how controversial all this was and how unfair it really was. Now, one of the interesting things, I guess, as we look at this is Jesus wasn't technically, I guess, a Roman citizen. He was a Jew, and he was a citizen of Israel, and he was born in Bethlehem, and he was a Nazarene, but in the theoretical sense, it's never said that he was a Roman citizen. Now, Paul had dual citizenship. He was an Israelite, and he also had Roman citizenship. But we don't see that with Jesus. And so Jesus is not someone who is, again, a citizen of Rome, and there's some differences here again. And so he asked him about this, and Pilate's response is pretty clear. Am I a Jew? He's claiming, or the charge is that he is the king of the Jews. Most certainly Pilate's answer is pretty much the fact is, I'm not a Jew. I don't know, what your, ins and outs and twists and turns. I know what Rome is, and I know the government of Rome, but I have no idea about a lot of the traditions and customs of your people. I have no idea, technically, as we look in the book of Matthew and the book of Luke, he was a descendant of David, so he did have a claim to David's throne from both his physical mother and his earthly father, from both ways. As we've seen before in our Wednesday study, he had a claim to the throne. But again, that's really not the issue or the point at this time. However, we do realize that the envy and the jealousy of the religious leaders is at the very heart of this, because they were afraid that if the people followed Jesus, as we've said before, the Romans would come and they would dissolve the Sanhedrin council as a formal, all these people, if the Jewish people will follow this man and he can control them and keep them in check, then the Romans are going to come and take away our place in the nation. We've seen that before. And, they're not talking about taking it over. The Romans already had the nation. It was already subjected to Rome. But their place, that is, as the Sanhedrin, the governing body, and our nation as it belongs to us. It was our country. We were ruling it, reigning it through the Sanhedrin. And so the Romans would give it to him to reign and rule over if he'd do that. So there's envy there, there's jealousy there, there's just a lot of things going on behind the scenes. But again, he says, am I a Jew? Thy own nation and the chief priests have delivered thee unto me. What hast thou done? I'm not, again, in the daily click of things with the Jewish people. It's your own. Notice what he says here. It's as he describes this, your own nation and the chief priests have delivered thee. The chief priests, as part of the Sanhedrin, as far as those who were the ruling body, in essence, of the nation of Israel, you're charged by your own people, your nation, your government officials, your ruling party has delivered you into my hands. And so he asks the question, what hast thou done? Answer for yourself, to explain to me, what has got you to this point? Why has your nation and why has your political leaders, religious leaders, all of that, why have they brought you to me? And why is it that they want to charge you with death, to charge you as being such an evildoer that you're worthy of death? Does anybody have any questions or comments down through 35?
Well, John leaves out the part about, I think it was Colin, I don't know if it's, I think it was his wife, kind of trying to say, don't have anything to do with Jesus.
Yeah, in one of the other accounts, she had a dream. Pilate's wife had apparently had a dream and been troubled, and having heard of this, as you bring that up and as we think about it, it's early in the morning, so they've been asleep all night while all this is going on. And so no doubt she's just waking up from sleep and she's had this bad dream. And here's this guy standing in the judgment hall that she's dreamed about. And so, yes, in one of the accounts, it does say that, she warned him about, the dream and all that she had and been troubled with the night before. And Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. Now, at this point and at this time, this is a serious situation. It's a serious time. And so Jesus is, again, not going to lie. He's not going to misrepresent the truth. In some cases, he won't say anything. Even under our own law, we have a right to remain silent. We have what we call the Fifth Amendment, the right to remain silent and choose, not to incriminate ourselves or cause things to be any worse. But Jesus makes it clear in this statement, my kingdom is not of this world. Caesar has nothing to fear from Jesus. And really the Jewish leaders didn't have anything to fear from him per se, other than the fact that, they couldn't keep doing things the way they wanted to rather than the way God wanted to. And if they had repented and become a part of the kingdom and all that Jesus and God were working on, they most certainly could have had a place. They could have had a part or lot in some of the things that pertain to the early church. Some of those who were the high priests, some of those who were the religious leaders, some of those could very well have been in a position or a place to have been elders over some of the church and those bodies that met there, but they chose to put themselves in an adversarial position with Jesus. People today still want to insist that the kingdom is some kind of earthly reign. And Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. It can't get much plainer than that. He said, if my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight. As we've seen with Peter, who drew his sword and cut off the ear of the high priest's servant, and as we've seen in other places where the multitudes were willing to come and by force make him king. And that's not, they weren't going to force him to be a king, but it's talking about the fact that they were willing to go to war and to force the issue about putting Jesus in as king. They were willing to fight the Jewish leaders. They were willing to fight the Romans. They were willing to do whatever it took to make him king. And that's why Jesus many times, again, separated himself from the crowds and the multitudes when he saw that they were kind of getting whipped up into a fury about making him king, because he knew that his kingdom was not of this world, and he was not contemplating some great battle against the Romans. He wasn't contemplating some great battle against the Jewish leaders. He had no idea, he had no plans to involve the world in yet one more battle with killing and all that goes along with that. And so they would be fighting very hard. They would be storming the gates of this palace if they believed that my kingdom were this world. They most certainly would have made sure that I wasn't delivered unto you. And so he says that, but now is my kingdom not from hence, or from this world. My kingdom is not of this world, he says that clearly. And my kingdom doesn't come from this world, he says that clearly. His kingdom is a spiritual kingdom. It is a kingdom that comes from heaven. It is the reign of Jesus as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords.
His kingdom's from God, from the world,
His kingdom was not by fighting and securing borders, and whether it was the Holy Land or the whole earth. Matter of fact, in Luke 17, 20 and 21, when they pressured him about the kingdom and when the kingdom was going to come, he made a point of saying it won't come with observation, and it won't come with borders as you think of, where you can say, well, the kingdom's over there, the kingdom's over here, the borders at this place or that place. When you pass from one country to another, there is, notations. It's interesting. I was watching a thing the other day of someone who was camping up in Canada. They were Canadian citizens, and they came down through a wooded area where they were camping, and there was a fence there with a gate, and you opened the gate up and you went a little bit further, and there was a mowed area. And there was a sign basically warning them not to go any further, because this was the end of the border of Canada with the United States. And there was a camera on there watching the area there. And there was a post in the ground. And on one side it said Canada, on the other side it said the United States. And so, again, there was borders. I mean, even in places that, you wouldn't think to look, we mark the borders and the territory and make sure we understand where we're at. And passing from one country to another usually requires going through customs and explaining the purpose for your visit, and whether it's formal or informally asked. And Jesus said, that's not the way my kingdom's going to be. It's not going to come from battles. It's not going to come from warfare. It's not going to come by force, and it's not going to come from some type of observation in the sense that you can say here, the kingdom of heaven extends to here and the kingdom of heaven extends to there. And in Luke 17, 20, 21, it talks about the fact that the kingdom will be in you. The kingdom resides in us. And so wherever the people of God are, the kingdom of God has authority and rule over us, over our actions, over our lives. But this person standing here, who's not a Christian, the kingdom of heaven at that time has no reign or rule. The kingdom of heaven is not there. And so the Lord adds us to the church, and we're the temple of God, and He dwells in us, and the kingdom of heaven is within us in the authority and the power of God. So, again, with his discussion with Pilate and his discussion with the Jewish leaders, he makes it very clear. And again, in Mark 9 and 1, it talks about, the kingdom would come with power. And in Acts 2, we see the coming of the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost. And even Peter explains how that all of that is a fulfillment of the prophets. And so, I'm not sure that Pilate necessarily comprehended all of what Jesus was trying to say, but he wasn't scared. I don't think he was concerned that Caesar was in any danger of this guy who they had drugged before him early in the morning. Pilate therefore said unto him, Art thou a king then? How can you be a king? If your kingdom's not of this world, how can you be a king? Are you a king then? And the question basically is, if you don't have any land and it's not of this world, how are you a king? Are you a king then? Your people are saying you're the king, but you're saying you don't have any territory, not interested in territory, you're not interested in fighting. So, are you really a king? Is what they're saying. And he says, in response, Thou sayest that I am a king, and to this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. And we know back in John 17, when he prayed earlier, he said, Sanctify them through thy word. Thy word is truth. He came to bear witness unto the truth. Everyone that is of the truth heareth my voice. And so, again, with the Greeks, there's all kinds of philosophers, and in the history of the Greeks and the Romans, there's been all kinds of philosophers that have come along. And so, again, I don't know exactly what Pilate thought or understood, but in the greater scheme of things, there's been people come along, Socrates and Plato, and, there's just all kinds of people who came speaking some kind of philosophy. Pilate here seems to, with this, come to an understanding, okay, you're kind of one of those people. We've got ourselves another philosopher. He's just, again, teaching ideas and truth. He's here to give witness to the truth. Now, Pilate, being a Roman, had no idea of what truth necessarily was, and we see that when Pilate said unto him, What is truth? From a philosophical standpoint, people have been debating so-called truths. Each one of these philosophers of the Greeks and Romans, they all had a particular flavor of truth. And if you ask the Pharisees one thing, getting it more into the Jews, if you ask the Pharisees, what is truth, they would have gave you one answer. If you asked the Sadducees about truth, they'd have gave you another answer. The Essenes, which we don't really see a lot of in the scriptures, but they existed. And if you asked them about the truth, they would have had a different answer. And, Pilate, he asked the question, what is truth? Now, we don't have a record of Jesus going into great detail telling him that. But what we do find, whatever conversation they may or may not have had, again, once he said that, we're told he went out unto the Jews and said unto them, I find in him no fault. Now, if you look, it's in italics, it says at all. Those have been added. Those two words are added to kind of make the case or the point which Pilate is making. But it's again, I find in him no fault. I'm not worried as a Roman official here in Jerusalem. I'm not afraid that his people are going to storm the palace and try to overthrow me or anybody else here. And so, as far as a Roman official is concerned, Pilate's basically, what he's saying is, he's not broken any Roman law. And as a Roman, I don't find any reason, again, if you got a problem with him based on your laws and traditions and customs, then you're going to have to deal with that. But you have a custom. Pilate says that I should release unto you one at the Passover. Will you therefore that I release unto you the King of the Jews? Now, this is an interesting question because they've brought him there. And so it's why would they want him to release him? And again, I suppose he's maybe looking for the majority's response to this. But they cried again, saying, not this man, but Barabbas. Barabbas was a robber, one who had caused problems and troubles. And they had conspired together to ask for him, which is another interesting thing because he was a hardened criminal. And it's interesting that as you look at this and you think about it, because Jesus happened to come before Pilate at this particular time, this person who was a terrible person was released. And that's kind of what Jesus did. Jesus came to die on the cross that even the worst of sinners might be saved in his death. And so symbolically, Jesus saved Barabbas by taking his place on the cross. And probably we see that there were robbers and thieves that were there crucified on each side of Jesus, and I would imagine that middle cross was intended for Barabbas. But they asked for his release, and so Jesus ultimately ends up on that cross. And so, again, it's good symbolism in the sense that Jesus took our place on the cross. Now, there's an interesting thing about his name, Barabbas. When you break that down, Bar means the son of. What does Abba mean? Didn't know there's going to be a test, did you? Abba means father, or it is the statement in Romans 8, Paul says that we have received the adoption of sons whereby we cry, Abba, Father. And so his name basically means the son of the Father. He was one of God's children. just like everybody else, and Jesus died for all of God's children. And so symbolically in him and even in his name is a symbolism that we are all the children of God, and Jesus come to die so that we might be saved, that we might be reconciled unto God. And so that's kind of a little interesting sidebar there in that discussion. Any questions or comments down through?
The name, is it spelled B-A-R-A-B-A-N? And they said, and Barabbas was a thief.
Yeah, it's B-A-R-A-B-B-A-S.
Well, I only got one B in.
Oh, okay.
You gotta look, 1880s were a long time ago.
Well, again, different spellings, but Abba is A-B-B-A,
Now Barabbas is,
and that's not talking about the singing group.
now Barabbas was B-A-R-A-B-A-S, but they have another name up here at the Fort District, B-A-R-A-B-A-N.
I mean, and again, there's different ways in which stuff are spelt between the Greek and between the English. Just like we call the book of Jude, Jude, but it's actually Judas. We spell it J-U-D-E, but the actual Greek is J-U-D-A-S. It's talking about Judas. And of course, what is a shock to a lot of people is the book of James is not really the book of James, because it's not James that's in there, it's Jacob. It's when we look at the actual Greek, the name that's in that, Jesus' stepbrother, half-brother, was not called James, he was called Jacob. The translators changed it from Jacob to James, and one of the reasons that is given is that they wanted King James' name to be in the book, the Bible. It was King James translation, so they changed Jacob to James.
Now this one's got Judas.
But again, it's just kind of an interesting play on words. You know, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, and we are all children of God through faith in Christ Jesus. And as children of God, we receive the adoption whereby we cry, Abba, Father. And there's just a lot of things going, again, on in there that just brings out some interesting thoughts.
There's one more, is on the day of the Passover, of course, mine's got passed, but Pilate found a scapegoat to get himself out of between a rock and a hard spot.
Yeah. Again, on the day, the Day of Atonement, there was the scapegoat. One was sacrificed for the sin, and the sins then were placed on the head of the other goat, and it was taken out into the wilderness and turned loose, symbolizing that the sins were gone or were remitted by the other. And so Jesus sort of becomes the sacrifice, and
John washing his hands.
yeah.
That's another one. Everybody says that.
There's a lot of interesting things that we could go into in the traditions and the customs. There's a lot of parallels, and again, the Old Testament, and the Hebrew writer tells us that those were all types and shadows of things which were yet to come as it applied to Jesus and his death. And of course, the sacrificial lamb and the Passover lamb, he is our Passover.
Why not make this the day that you and your family seek out the Church of Christ in your community? We encourage you to attend one of our worship times or Bible studies. God's grace, truth, and salvation is truly worth finding and knowing. May God bless and keep you as we walk together in his truth. And remember, as always, the churches of Christ salute you. Our new programs are posted to Facebook and YouTube on Thursday afternoon, and they should be available for viewing by 7 p.m. We also encourage our viewers to visit our website at www.thechurchesofchrist.life. We ask that you like us on Facebook and share our programs. On YouTube, please share and subscribe for notifications. This program was pre-recorded.